There are lots of stories in the Bible that are designed to help us understand who we are and who God is. Now, one reason most of us are here in the first place is to figure all that out. Who are we and who is God after all? And how does that relationship work? And are we loved and are we accepted? I think that one story opens the door for us to answer those questions a lot better than most, or at least it's a story that invites us inside to explore that answer, the parable of the prodigal son. It's actually one of three stories in a row that Jesus tells after the Pharisees and scribes have taken him to task for associating with certain types of sketchy people. They are put out because Jesus is not merely associating with lepers, tax collectors, and women of ill repute. He's openly defying Jewish dietary laws by eating with these people. And he's not content with dining privately in their unclean homes. He's gone beyond that by returning their hospitality and receiving them as any host would receive an honored guest. This is so galling to the Pharisees and scribes because they are the God-fearing believers who don't just talk about their faith, they live it out by respecting God's laws to the letter. It is not an easy life, but they do it anyway because it sets a good example for everyone else. It's not as if the scribes and the Pharisees don't care about the people they consider to be sinners either. They simply feel that the best way to help out those poor folks is to hold a high standard of behavior which these others can emulate. But if you fall short of that standard, you simply try again to be the best you can be. Now, some people have what it takes, and some tragically do not. But it's best not to mix the two. It's actually an appealing message. After all, there are rules, and there are rewards for those who obey the rules. And for those who don't, well, they either try again, or they're just obviously not interested in being among the righteous, so they're going to get what they deserve. That's what the scribes and the Pharisees believed, at least, and I have to admit, sometimes they sound like my kind of people. I have to admit that with some pain and embarrassment, but to be honest, I do have to admit it. For instance, many years ago, I was at my car at a stoplight, and a man was standing at the intersection holding up a tattered cardboard sign that read, "Homeless, hungry, needs sleeping bag, please help. No drugs or booze." My son Charlie he was about 4 years old at the time. He was in the car with me in the back seat, and he asked me, what did the man's sign say? And so I read it to him, and he said, "Well, why is that man standing out there on the street all day long in the hot sun?" And seizing the opportunity to teach an important life lesson, a real dad moment, I said, "Well, you see, Charlie, while we really don't know anything about that man or what he may be going through in his life, we also know that usually, if people are willing to work, there is work out there for them." And as soon as those words left my mouth, the guy in the car, and right in front of me in line, reached out and handed that man several dollars. And I suddenly realized what I had said to Charlie, and I looked in the rearview mirror at myself and said, "Great life lesson there, Reverend Pharisee." Still, it's easy to see where the scribes and Pharisees are coming from. They're living in a way of understanding who they are and who God is that makes sense. A pretty simple system of black and white, right and wrong, and cause and effect. But then Jesus comes along and he starts messing around with that system, treating sinners like they were something special, and even socializing with them, which in the eyes of the scribes and the Pharisees, well, that was as good as condoning their bad behavior, therefore robbing sinners of any motivation to do better. Why should you even try to elevate people if Jesus is going around treating everyone as equal? And in response to their disapproval, Jesus does not argue with the scribes and the Pharisees. Instead, he tells them three stories, all with the same basic outline, but it's the one at the end that really packs a wallop. Now, we know those stories as the parables of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the prodigal son. In each story, something is lost, and then it's found, and then there is much rejoicing. Now, in the first two stories, the thing that was lost might be kind of hard for us to identify with. We can't identify very well with a sheep. They are as dumb as dirt, and it's not much easier to identify with a coin, which after all is an inanimate object. But almost all of us can identify, at least in some measure, with a son who goes off and sows his wild oats, runs out of money, and finds himself in the pits, and then comes back home because he really just has nowhere else to turn. Not that any of us have acted that way, oh no, but we've all known someone who has. But the thing is, we're really not supposed to identify with the younger son in this story because remember, we're all scribes and Pharisees listening to this. We would never run off with our father's inheritance and do those kinds of things, would we? No, in each story, we're not being asked to identify with what was lost or who was lost, but to discover a new connection with the one who is doing the finding. After all, Jesus doesn't begin by saying that there once was a son who had a father and a brother. No, he says there was a man who had two sons. So the father is the main character here, and he's the one we need to pay attention to because that is who the scribes and the Pharisees were paying attention to. Now, they may also have related to the plight of the older brother in this story, but they really paid attention to the father's behavior. In that time and place, a son running away, but first taking his father's inheritance, was symbolically the same thing as wishing that his father was dead. And when he had squandered everything, he comes up with a pretty calculated confession designed to get him back with a roof over his head and food in his belly so that, in other words, he could now live off his brother's inheritance, that good brother who had abided by all the rules. But no sooner did his father see his bad son coming down the road toward him that the elder brother's prized possession, his fatted calf, his Maserati, was being killed, and the party was on. There was no heart-to-heart talk between the father and the runaway son, no extra chores to do. No, now go to your room for a week and think about what you've done. None of that. No, just a clean robe for his back and a fine ring for his hand and new sandals for his feet. The father didn't even wait for the older brother to return home from his hard work in the fields before starting the celebration. So the older brother comes home to the sound of music and merriment and dancing and the very familiar aroma of something on the grill. And I'm glad I wasn't the one who had to tell him what the party was all about. If you're an older sibling, you can probably relate to this. Now, I dearly love my little sister, Kathy, but when I was growing up, this princess of our household could do no wrong. There was the time, for instance, when Kathy, who was about 5 years old, walked outside into the front yard as I was mowing the grass. She knew that she was not supposed to do this. You knew that, Kathy. And sure enough, a dirt clod flew out from under the mower and popped her upside the head. Now, she wasn't really hurt, seriously enough. It just raised a welt, but she cried and cried and cried. And who do you think got the blame? Not Kathy, who had clearly broken the rules. Oh, no. I was at fault because I continued to mow the yard because I was doing my job. Not that I still hold any lingering resentment over that and the many other similar injustices that were perpetrated. No, I'm all over that. But honestly, is there really anything wrong with facing the consequences of your actions? What about reaping what you sow? What kind of world would this be if we all made a practice out of rewarding sinners while we God-fearing folks are still out mowing the grass, doing our job? And what do you have to do to get a party around here? Do you have to go off and squander your inheritance before you can come home to be embraced and kissed and assured that, of course, you belong. Listen, the older son says to his father, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed a command, and you've never given me as much as a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, this son of yours, the older son says, cutting himself off from his family, this son of yours, who's no kin to me, nor will I be any kin to you, if you're going to choose him over me. And here's where the loving father earns his title. He knows that he's lost both sons now, one to a life of recklessness and the other to a life of angry self-righteousness. That older son wants his father to love him because that's the way he deserves to be loved. But the thing is, and this is the key point of this story, the father does not love either of his children because of what they deserve. He just loves them. More because of who he is than because of who they are. He just loves them with a love that transcends right and wrong and any rules, with a love that throws homecoming parties for sinners, and a love that expects the righteous to rejoice, with a love for one child that does not preclude loving the other. The father says, all I have is yours, son. You're always with me. Now come on inside and enjoy the celebration, because this brother of yours, your brother, was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found. It's an invitation for the older brother and for the righteous Pharisees and scribes and for you and me to come back into relationship, to get over ourselves, to see beyond our limited vision of what is right and what is proper, and to grasp the big picture, to see at long last that our relationships of love with one another, that's what matters most. To acknowledge our own lostness and our own experience of being found, to admit finally that none of us holds the patent on righteousness or comprehends the full breadth and depth of God's truth, or has any claim of moral superiority. Here's what's really interesting. Jesus never says whether the older brother ever does go inside to join the party. He just leaves them standing outside, listening to what's going on inside. And I think that's because it's up to each of us to finish this story, to decide whether we will stand outside all alone or take our place at a table full of reckless and righteous saints and scoundrels, sisters and brothers, united by our relationship to the one who does not give us the love we deserve, but is the same one who cannot be prevented from giving us the love we need.